Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. Today we have Brian Taylor from NetSuite. He is the VP of Security and Compliance, and he's going to talk about security and controls in NetSuite. We're going to go ahead and unmute the attendees. So if you have questions, just feel free to hop in when you have a second. You can also feel free to type in your question in the question box or raise your hand, whichever you prefer. So we do want to make this a little bit interactive, so please feel free to hop in with your questions. And we are also recording this, so we'll send out the link so you can share it with your colleagues. So Brian, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Trish. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a presentation that we were going to give at our last GRC day, but I was unfortunately pulled away and was not able to do it. So we're doing it as a makeup session in a webinar format. It's a small group today, and so I normally like having a lot of audience participation anyways, so especially given how few people we have on the call, I don't think it would be disruptive or get us off track or something if people ask questions as we're going along, so please feel free to do so. Come on, next slide, here we go. I don't know that I'm going to be talking about a lot of future-looking stuff today, but you've seen these kinds of slides in the past. If I do say something about like future, and there is a little bit about future roadmap stuff at the back, but you should take all of that with a grain of salt. Certainly, anything that I talk about is accurate at the moment to the best of my knowledge, but these things do have a way of changing. So please don't make purchasing or investing decisions based on things that I say in here. Okay. So I'd like to check in just to get an idea of who is on the call, and then I wanted to talk about a few different topics. I wanted to talk about security inside NetSuite, auditing NetSuite, some controls that are built in, and then a little bit of information about like where we're headed from here. So
I know we're
I've been thinking, so this, sorry, I got distracted momentarily by Trish. I've been thinking about this in her hand, but I'm here and you're here. Doesn't that make it our time? This is one of my quotes from one of my favorite movies when I was a kid. And really what it's just talking about, like I was saying before, like we're all here. This is all our time. Please make it to the best of your use. If I'm talking about stuff that you already know intimately, or if I kind of gloss over something that's important to you, please pause me and ask me to elaborate. So there are a lot of different people who come to these kinds of sessions. I'd like to just get an idea of who are the people who are on the call now, and what their role in their companies are. I see Anthony is on the call.
Anthony's part of the FastPass team, actually.
Oh, sorry, Hank.
That's okay. Hold on, Brian. I'm going to unmute everybody because we had muted them.
Okay.
There's some noise, so hold on one second.
Sure.
Hank is self-muted. Nancy?
I don't know how to do
Nancy, did you want to introduce yourself?
Have you seen this trick before, Ben? You watch David Blaine specials?
All right. How about Hatal?
Hey guys, so I'm from Silicon Corporation, and I'm a sysadmin and a business analyst in Silicon for the NetSuite.
Okay, good to know. So you're on the IT side of the house.
Yep. And then how about you, Hank?
I'm from Qualys. I'm a senior NetSuite administrator.
Okay, so 2 NetSuite admins. All right, excellent. So you guys will be definitely interested in, especially in the kind of more technical side of things. And then Nancy, is Nancy from Qualys also? What company is Nancy from?
Adapar?
Adapar. Oh, okay.
We can. I think she might have stepped away. Or.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll just go on. If she comes back, she can introduce herself if she cares to. Okay. So let's talk a bit about security first. All right. So there are a lot of capabilities inside NetSuite to actually assist you in securing data. And I'm just going to kind of pop through a couple of these right now. So we've got roles, and we're going to talk about all of these things as we kind of move through this. But we've got roles and permissions and restrictions on those. We've got two-factor authentication and IP address restrictions and field level security, all these different kinds of things. We're going to go through all of this today. One thing when we talk about security that I like to highlight and warn people about is custom forms are not security. Custom forms are about presentation. So when you're saying that I want to take this customer record and kind of move the fields on around it and change what tabs show and what order they're on, hide certain fields, hide certain tabs, all of that is just presentation. All of that data is still on the form in most instances if you go to view source. And this is similar in search. If you just hide a field on a form, it's still available to people to search using the search capabilities if they have search for that record at all in most cases. And so I warn people to watch out for that. And then also to be aware that the external centers like the partner center and the vendor center and the customer centers, these are extremely powerful and they are full roles. Maybe they have specialized access defined in them compared to the employee center role, which is very, very restricted. But these are much closer to internal, normal roles, like your accounting or bookkeeper role or things like that, than they are to the employee center role. They're much more powerful. So be aware when you're publishing things to various forms and records that you're not inadvertently exposing information that you don't want to these other center roles. So let's talk a bit more about the particulars of these things. So roles and permissions, this is really about defining what type of access people have in the account and how they're able to interact with the forms. And then it's pretty straightforward. It's just you just have a name of a role and it's got some permissions at some levels and maybe some kind of meta information. Then you go and assign these roles to various employees. There's the layer to this where you can assign global permissions directly to employees. A lot of people are aware of this. Some people are not. This is useful when you want to say Bob gets to have this one permission all the time, regardless of what role that he is in. And then a lot of people think, especially if they're new to NetSuite, well, that's it, right? It's just roles and permissions and assign them employees and you're done. And it turns out that there's actually quite a bit of environments and capabilities and tools and edge cases that if you aren't aware of all the different things that define or change what people can get access to in NetSuite, you really can find that people have access to more than what you think or less than what you think. It's much more complicated and really powerful, and hence in some instances complicated, than just roles and permissions. And so let's talk about a bunch of this stuff today. So in its most basic form, you have a person, and he's in a region. He's a sales rep, John will say. Maybe John has access to the opportunity record or the opportunity permission. The opportunity permission gives him, among other things, access to the opportunity record and the ability to create opportunity tasks, which is really just a fancy name for opportunities. And then Jane, for the example here, is John's does all this mean? So on the far right, these are what we would consider permissible components. They are the most granular statement about what is a thing and the kind of access somebody can have access to it. And then these are collected into permissions. And so in NetSuite right now, it's common that you'll have a permission that'll be something like sales order. And sales order has lots of different permissible components that it controls, that permission. So it may control access to who can open and view sales orders, who can search for them, who can edit them, who can change them from one state to another. And so there's several who can use certain kinds of task links and buttons on the sales orders. And so some permissions are quite broad and have lots of permissible components that they're controlled by them. Others can be very narrow and have a single thing that they can control. But ultimately, once you've defined a set of permissions, and you can then assign those to a role, in this case, the sales rep role. It's important to note that at the moment, the permissible components are not something that you have the ability to change. They are fixed. You have the ability to change the permission levels associated, or the access levels associated with the permission, and you have the ability to associate or remove permissions from roles. But the most basic component, the permissible component, is not something you have the ability to change at the moment. And then finally, you have the ability to assign restrictions. And so what that would mean in this case is that for John may have access to the sales rep role, which gives him access to, say, all sales orders in every single region, in every single subsidiary. But if we restrict him to the North America region, then he will only be able to manipulate sales orders from that are classified with that. And you can do that with class, department, location, things like that. There's multiple subsidiary. There are multiple ways that you can restrict a role so that it kind of carves out what they can see. And then finally, as I mentioned, Jane in here as example is John's boss. Because Jane is John's boss, Jane will see all the things that John can in relation to certain kinds of roles inside NetSuite and permissions within NetSuite. Like, so for example, sales records, all the sales permissions are rolled up to Jane so that she'd be able to see all of what her subordinates can see. Okay, so going into this a little bit more detailed, again, I was saying permissible components get associated with permissions. Permissions get associated with one or more roles. Some roles can be custom. The standard roles like accountant, employee center, those are not editable by you. And then various roles get associated to one or more people. And then global permissions get associated directly between a person on the employee record of that person to a specific permission. So, for example, if you had a scenario where you had a sales or a product manager, let's say, who was going to do a short-term assignment and he or she needed elevated permissions for a month or two. Well, if you don't have global permissions, what you have to do is you then have to go in and either create an entire new role and give it to that person. Now you've got to audit that thing. You've got to remember to take it away. You've got to remember to, like, who has it, all these sorts of things. But the other problem with that is that if John's the person, let's for example, that needs that permission, now you've given it to every single person who's a product manager that shares that role with him. But instead, if you just go to the global permission on his employee record under the access tab and assign that directly to him, then only he will have it. And it's a much more laser focused way of assigning permissions, but it isn't a way that you want to manage like most bulk permissions, because it's just, it will become unmanageable to do that for a lot of permissions. So global permissions, as I said before, are based on employee, and they override the permissions that somebody has in a given role. So if somebody has a role that normally wouldn't allow them to have access to something, and you give them a global permission, then they'll have access to it. It also can restrict access. So you could reduce somebody's access using a global permission as well. And one of the benefits of this is it's great for limiting role explosion. So you just don't have hundreds and hundreds of roles as you find like these little edge cases over the years. When we talk about roles, one thing I really like to highlight for people as a best practice is please come up with a way of mapping roles to a job function rather than job titles. You're going to have scores of sales rep job titles, right? And I use that one as an example because there's a lot of people in those departments, but professional services, any of these departments might have lots of people who do almost the same job, but with slightly different job title. Like you could imagine, like I'm like the account manager for, the West Coast region, and somebody else could be the account manager for the East Coast region or whatever. But at the end of the day, they're both sales reps. And if you try and map all of the different roles that people should get based on their job title, you're going to get miserable really fast. So really try and do it based on job function. And we have come out recently, well, I guess it's maybe a year old or so now, but recently we have HCM, our human capital management module, has incorporated position management. And if that's something that you're interested in, you should definitely spend some time looking at that, what the capabilities are around that. So audiences and groups. Audiences and groups are extremely powerful. There's two different kinds of audiences in the, and what they're used for in both cases are the ability to segment or group either users or reports, or they're used in lots of different contexts. We'll talk about it in a moment, but they're basically used to segment what type of access a person or a script or a report has based on things like the class or department, subsidiary group of a person, of a user using a particular role. And there's two forms of it. There's a legacy form that still appears in some places that's basic. It allows you to pick a single class or a single department or location. And then there's a more advanced version, which is the more common one that you'll see in most places nowadays. That is, it allows you to multi-select, basically. You can pick multiple roles, multiple departments, subsidiaries, partners, things like that. And also segments, which I should add to this slide. Actually, segments are also something you can create audiences and groups off of. So there's two different kinds of groups. There's static groups and dynamic groups. One of the things that you might do is you might use a static group to define who has access to, say, for example, your SuiteScript folders, or a particular folder in the file cabinet, the document folders. Static groups are good for small groups that you're not changing a lot. You have to go in and add people manually and remove people manually, so there's a lot more maintenance. It's not particularly scalable, but when you really want to tightly control and assure yourself that you know exactly who has access to something and who doesn't, then static groups are the way to go. Dynamic groups are defined by saved searches. And so you'll say, here's a dynamic group, and I'm going to say, this group is based on a search of all employees that are active that have the Department of Professional Services, and you could go as granular as, and whose boss is Sarah or whatever. But once it's set up, anytime somebody new is created as an employee or edited, if you change, like, what department somebody's in or whatever, dynamically, as you make changes to the employee records by adding or modifying them or removing them, people will just pop in and out of these dynamic groups. So this is great if you want to do something where you say, you can only see the leads in North America if you belong to the North America, sales group, or product managers who are tagged as being CRM product managers can see information from, user stories around the, I mean, you can imagine lots of different ways of using this, but basically it's great when you have lots of users that you're in these groups and they're coming and going out of them a lot. You want to have some control over it, but it's not required to be the kind of level control that you would use to, say, protect like the scripts in your script SuiteScript folders. So scripting and workflow is one of the things that I would like to talk about today as well. In particular, I'd like to highlight that these things are extremely powerful. If you're running what's called a oh, I'm totally blanking all of a sudden. The scripts that run as admin on the back end that are scheduled scripts. Thank you. Sorry. The scheduled scripts, you can imagine, are the closest thing that you might correlate to, like a cron job or a back end process that just runs nightly. And a lot of times people expect those to have kind of root or admin-like access, but often people don't understand that the client-side scripts, which are only run in the browser, those are extremely powerful and sensitive, and as sensitive as server-side scripts, even though they're only running in the browser. And it's not just because they might see information that's in the actual and act on it in the record that a particular person has opened up, but also because they could do things that would be unexpected, especially if they were introduced by somebody who is malicious. So you could imagine a disgruntled employee or somebody who had managed to kind of hack your account, if God forbid. But you could imagine somebody putting a script in place that anytime somebody in HR opened up a record, there was an employee record, it captured information off the record and then, sent it to themselves or emailed it or whatever. And that can be done even if you're let's say you're an admin, like your lower level admin who has some restricted scripting access, but you don't have access to the employee record. Well, you could still use that in a malicious way to mine information off the employee record. And so be aware that client-side scripts are just as important and sensitive to secure as server-side scripts. Another thing I really want to highlight is, both for yourself and for when you're interacting with partners, is try to avoid running scripts as admin. Try to use as often as possible, where it makes sense, having scripts run either as the currently logged in user or as a specific role that has been crafted to have the minimum access necessary to allow the script to work effectively. And this is just a minimum, like least privileges principle that gets ignored a lot, especially I find by the partner community, because it's easy and expedient, but it really opens you up to a lot more pain if anything ever goes wrong, even if it's not malicious, even if it's just accidental with a script. And so I highly recommend that you really work hard to even if it takes more time to figure out why a particular script isn't able to access some record or some field or something, try to avoid running scripts as admin as much as possible. And secure your suite script directory. The suite script directory, I mean, if somebody has control of the suite script directory, they are basically admin in your account. They're root. They can do anything they want because they can access basically anything in the suite, either directly or through, as I was saying before, running things as other people. So you really need to secure it, lock it via a static group. And I would recommend setting up Safe Search email alert that monitors and lets you know when files in there are changing and that you audit that. I would say at least weekly. It's actually not too tough of a process to get used to once you get into it. I did this for Enel Corp, and honestly, most weeks it took me 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes to go through that on Monday morning, just to give myself some confidence that I knew what types of scripts were changing in my account and who was doing it. So there are lots of permissions and roles and different kinds of capabilities and whatnot in the suite that are important and are dangerous in terms of them offering broad, powerful access to the suite. This is a partial list of them. There's no way we could actually go through all of them the time that we have, but I think many of them are kind of self-explanatory, but a few maybe not. So I wanted to talk about just a few of these in particular. So custom entry forms are the ability, and the custom transaction forms permissions are two permissions that allow you to either let somebody edit things like employee records or contact records. This is what an entry form would be, or custom transaction forms, which would be things like sales orders and opportunities and estimates and things like that. And these, when you give somebody the ability to do this, because you're like, well, we need, Sarah to be able to move tabs around and hide fields because she's working very closely with the sales department in order to get them just the view that they need to be effective and productive. So we're going to give her custom transaction form permission. Well, regardless of whether it's entry form or transaction form, they both have a scripting subtab or subtab on them. And on that subtab, you have the ability to go in and assign scripts to that form. And as I was saying before, client-side scripts, which is what you assign here, not the server-side, are just as powerful in many ways as server-side scripts. So really be careful who you allow to have access to, and make certain they know what they're doing and that you trust them. And this is another reason why I suggest auditing what's happening with your scripts and whatnot. Now, another thing is that custom fields and custom record manager. So if you give someone custom fields permission, it means they can go in and sit, and again, like we're talking about Sarah, and she's working with the sales department and they decide they want to add a new custom field to the opportunity record, she can go in and do that because she has this permission. And custom record manager lets people manage any custom record basically. And one of the things that's interesting about this is when you do this, it gives people the ability to add fields to any record that they can do this with. And then one of the particular capabilities of that is called sourcing. So you can add a field, let's say you add a field that's an employee dropdown. And then you can add multiple fields like phone number and email address and manager, which would be a really common thing for you to do. And then you could source those field values from the employee select that you first created. And so this is a really common thing where you'll see things like I select a sales rep on an opportunity record, and it sources in from their employee record, their phone number, their manager, their email address, that sort of thing, so you can contact them if you have to escalate something or ask a question. It's a really common thing to do. The challenge is that you can also source things from the employee record that you might not want people sourcing. And so basically this would be a way of allowing people to mine information off of the employee record. So again, you really need to have good controls over who are you letting to have access. A lot of times, especially with smaller companies, I see people well, this department really needs, really wants to, we don't have a large IT department. We want to be able to be proactive and responsive and let them self-manage some things. So we're going to give them entry form permission and custom fields and all these things. You can certainly do that. But just be aware that when you're giving people these types of capabilities, you're giving them a great deal of power. And then the last thing I want to talk about is something which I am really surprised to see so we have the capability called view unmasked credit card numbers. And by default, NetSuite won't let you see a credit card once you've put it in the suite. There are some very rare instances under like third-party logistics companies and things like that where a company might need to see an unmasked credit card number after they've entered it. The system doesn't need you to know the full unmasked credit card number in order to process it or do a refund or any of that. It doesn't affect it at all. So most people and most accounts should never need this turned on, and yet it's turned on in a surprising number of accounts. If you have this, there are a default number of roles in the suite that when you turn this on, and you have to turn it on by signing an addendum with us through support, and then they'll turn it on for you. You can't turn it on yourself. But once it's on, these default roles have the ability to view unmasked credit cards, and there's also a permission you can assign to it. And once you have that, any form you're looking at or search, anybody who has that permission can run a search, and they can see all of the unmasked credit card numbers in a heartbeat. And so it's incredibly powerful. And I strongly recommend that you never turn this on unless you have an absolute business need to do it. And if you do, I would use the apps. I would turn it on for the least amount of time possible with the least number of users possible, and then get it turned off again if you can. Two-factor authentication is something we've been investing a lot in. I strongly recommend everyone use it for as many roles as they can possibly get people in the company to use it. It's basically the ability to, besides your username and password or your email and password, to have either a hard token or a text on your phone. We support multiple different ways of doing two-factor authentication. We support RSA Secure ID, which is like literally like the hard plastic tokens you keep in your pocket to do a one-time password based on time. We support SMS texting. We also now support OAuth-based authenticator applications. So, I mean, you can use Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator. I mean, you can use Steam. Whatever you want to use, as long as it's OAuth-based and compliant. And these are really powerful because basically, if somebody scrapes your username and password, they're not going to be able to get in as you unless they can also, have your phone, right, or your, or your hard token, which makes it a lot harder for people to log in as you if they manage to compromise your credentials. And then basically you just identify like what roles you want to restrict by 2FA. But once you do that, all the people using that role have to use the 2FA. And you need to just think about like what's going to work for you. The app versus getting a text, the convenience versus RSA. There's pluses and minuses to all of them. SMSs are super convenient, but there are places people don't get cell coverage. The app is fantastic because it's right there on your phone. Some people like the hard tokens. RSA is good for that. It separates something from your phone, where a lot of times people will store their credentials on their phone anyways, so it gives you yet another piece of hardware that you have to have in order to log in. But it's not, you have to pay RSA for the tokens. So there's some considerations. You can decide where you fall in that. IP address restrictions are also something that we have as an ability for you to restrict, like, where people are logging in from. Do you want people to be able to log in if they're not on your corporate intranet? You can override it for individual people and roles. We support a lot of different formats on doing the various masking for what types of IP masks that you want. And one of the things you can do is pair it with your VPN to do kind of either a poor man's, like 2FA or belt and suspenders version of it. So basically, people won't be able to get into your NetSuite account, even if they know your username and password, unless they happen to be like they have your laptop or whatever with the VPN credentials on it. One thing I want to note is that if you're an e-commerce customer and you're using content delivery networks, IP address restrictions do not work with those because it interferes with the CDNs. And then another thing that I would like to highlight is field level security. This only applies to custom fields. Custom fields, we would like to extend this to standard fields, and we are working on it. It's on our roadmaps, but it's not in the near-term roadmap. But it is something we want to do eventually. But basically what this lets you do is say, There's an access level. Let's say we have a custom field. It doesn't really matter what it is, but like we're gonna put like a hidden discount field, and we want to restrict who can manipulate it, who can search for it, things like that. There's two different access levels you can do. One is who can actually even see that field or manipulate it on form. So none, you can't see it at all. View, you can view it. Edit, you can actually change the value. That's pretty straightforward. We also can restrict these things in searches. So if you have none for search for a custom field, what that means is you'll never see this field on any search and report. If you have run and somebody has created who has permission to the field, edit level permission to the field, and they've published that field to you on that search or report, then you'll be able to see it. But in order to like modify or incorporate that field into a search or report, you would have to have edit access to it if it's restricted. And so this is a powerful way of kind of restricting like highly sensitive fields on records at a field by field level, if they're custom fields. We do now support some encryption for data at rest in custom fields of type text. You use the encrypted format. Once you choose this, you can't undo it. So if you're creating a new custom field and you decide to say use encrypted format, you can only go forwards. There's no going back. It's supported on these types of text fields. The results are available to search. It's not available to reporting currently in the current reporting engine. I don't know if in the new reporting engine that's being built and search engine that's being built right now, if this will stay the same or not, but it's currently not available to reporting and analytics or for sourcing and filtering. And it's also not available to some SuiteScript APIs, and the system notes values get obfuscated. And that takes us out of the security portion of this presentation and into the audit portion. And so having said that, I want to, especially since there's two admins on, I wanted to pause for a moment and just ask if there were any questions that people had, or if they just want me to keep going into the audit section or not.
This is Hetal from eSilicon. No, I think this is very useful. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so in the audit section, now I know that at least two of you are IT people, but I'm sure that you will be, if you aren't already, there's a highly good chance that you will be exposed to a lot of audits. And this is useful from an IT perspective, really kind of from two different perspectives. One, from the more obvious one, which is, eventually you're going to have people from finance or internal audit or external auditors showing up on your door and asking you to prove various things to yourself, or to them and to yourself perhaps, that people haven't changed certain values or records or whatnot. But the other thing that's important about this is all those questions that people show up to ask you about are ultimately founded in just good administration practices. So if somebody shows up and asks you, like, prove to me that like this admin wasn't in modifying vendor records or whatever, that's something that you should care about even if you aren't being audited, right? That's just something that if you need to prove to somebody that some scripts or some key financial reports haven't been modified, those are the kinds of things that just, mature administration shops are monitoring and looking for, even if an external or internal auditor isn't at their door asking those same questions. So this next section will prove useful even if you aren't a public company being audited. So let's talk a little about this. We have greatly extended the help and documentation that's available to you to help understand like what kinds of capabilities are available. So this is straight up from the NetSuite Help Center. And you'll see under Account Administration, which is literally at the top level tab, Auditing and Data Management, Tracking Changes. You see these Auditing Master Data and Configuration Changes in NetSuite. System Notes Overview is extremely important. The internal controls in NetSuite, out-of-the-box internal controls and internal controls require basic configuration. Those are also very important topics that, that you should spend some time reading. And we're going to talk about in these next slides a lot of the information, not all of it, but a lot of the information in those sections. So it used to be that we had a lot of challenges auditing and reporting on and searching for changes to the configuration settings, and we have fixed that. I shouldn't say that. It's been it feels like it was just yesterday, but it was really 2-3 years ago now. But it feels like it was yesterday sometimes. But we now allow you to audit and search on and report on anytime somebody makes changes to configurations in the setup area if they have financial impact. So not every single setup area page is auditable and searchable, but we've gone through and identified the ones that we in customer feedback has informed us that has potentially financial impact. So company information, general preferences, accounting list, tax setup, these are now auditable. A lot of these pages have both a system notes tab, or sorry, do not have a system notes tab, but they do support system notes and search. And so a lot of these pages, what they do have is a history tab that was not searchable. It was a legacy sort of audit trail, and there's no system notes tab on it. But if you go into, depending on how you have your account set up, like list, search, save searches, and you select the save search of type system notes, you can basically go in and search for these kinds of records and changes to them directly, even though you won't see a tab of it on the record itself. But most of these do have an audit trail, but that is a legacy audit trail, and over time it will just go away and it'll be replaced entirely with system note search. So the audit trail, like if, for example, if we're on the setup page and we're looking at general preferences and you click this more link, you'll see this drop down and there'll be an audit trail. And then when you click that, you'll see show list when only one result was changed by Catherine from false to true on this date and time. Okay. But like I said, unfortunately, this is not searchable. The system notes version of it is. Okay. So these are the pages that allow you to now capture system notes and search on them. All of these, accounting lists, terms, tax codes, nexuses, general, all of this. So how would you do it? So you can kind of see in the background that we're doing a save system note search. And off to the right, you can see that we've selected record type as a filter. And so then that's popped up this search box. And you can see that on the left, these are the various filters that you're allowed to select. And I've picked things like enable features, company information, expense category, which were the things I was talking about before. And so you can, I thought the next slide was going to be a picture, another picture, but this will allow you to do things like search on, what were all the changes to these records over some given time, and then you'll get when the search result you'll get back will look very much actually like this, but it'll be a system note search and not an audit trail. And because it's a system note search, you can also do things like set up save search email alerts or schedule them to just run on like once a week, once a day, whatever you want, and mail it to somebody to review. Or you can just have it set up to mail somebody anytime a particular permission is modified or setting is modified if there's something you're really sensitive to. So because it's system notes based now, it's and save search based, it's very powerful. So for example, if you wanted to audit changes to enabled features, so you wanted to know when somebody had gone in and added, they turned on workflow and it wasn't on before. Again, this page doesn't have a system notes tab. You still can search for it. It has an audit trail. Only admins can enable and disable modules. So you would go in, you'd create a save system note search, you'd select record type is enabled features, and then run it. And then if you don't put any more criteria, it'll just do it for all time. And then bang, you'll see Catherine Mulligan went in and changed, the token-based user authentication from false to true, user deletion reason false true. So you can run this report anytime you want. We'll also have extensive capabilities to track changes to roles and permissions. This is incredibly powerful. So you can do things like know when permissions were added or removed to a role, when an employee had a role removed or added to them, when an employee was given a global permission or removed. If you're not familiar with the role diff tool, you should definitely spend some time familiar yourself with this. It's incredibly powerful. What this does is allow you to, I thought I had another picture on this, maybe it's in a moment, but what this does allow you to do is to take a role, say anything, bookkeeper, and compare it to one or more roles and show you what are the differences in permissions between all of those roles. And there's two modes of it. Show me everything, even if the permissions are the same, or just show me the deltas where they're different. And this is incredibly powerful when somebody comes to you and says, I can't do a thing, and I'm using this role, but Sarah seems to be able to do it. Well, what role is Sarah using? Well, she's using this other role. Okay, well, let's go really quickly see what are the differences between these two roles. And so it's very powerful. And here's so all the screenshots. So here's an example of how you would actually do an audit to save search to audit, like when a permission changed, right? So you would search on, is the permission or the role inactive, and then is the permission change date on or after a certain date. And then this will show you every time a permission was changed on all roles after that date. And you can obviously put different criteria in there, like between these dates, or for a particular role or set of roles. You can do all sorts of fancy things. You can audit when roles are assigned to employees by doing an employee search. And here I'm looking at like employees that are not inactive, who aren't terminated, who still have login access, that are for a particular type of employee, and that their role change date is within a certain period, and their hire date is after a certain date. And then here we'll see all the people that make all their permission changes, or role assignment changes, I apologize, that were made to them during that time period. And similarly for global permissions, you can do a global permission search. Global permission is not none. And then you add the global permission and global permission level to the results. And now you can see all the changes that were done to global permissions during some time period, whatever you define in the search. And then the role diff tool that I was talking about. Here you can see we're comparing accountants to the AR clerk and the AP clerk. And then the output from that is on the right. And you can see the permission and in the account. So for accounts, the permission in the accountant role is edit. In the AP clerk, it's none. In the AR clerk, it's none. And this has show diffs only. So if any of these roles have permissions where across all three of them, the permission is exactly the same, it won't show those permissions. You can uncheck that, check it, whatever you're trying to do. Editing changes to customization objects is a very common thing for people to want to monitor for obvious reasons. If you're changing the customization objects, it can have a lot of dramatic impacts on how your controls are working inside of the suite, financial or fraud or otherwise. Most customization objects have both a history and a system notes audit trail. As I said before, the history is kind of legacy. The supported records are all of these. I think it's most, if not all. Workflow audit trails. Workflow is a little bit trickier. So we do have system notes that track who made a change for all changes. If you save a workflow, there will be a system note entry that said, Bob saved this record on Thursday at 2 o'clock. The history tab on workflows tracks many individual edits, not necessarily every single individual edit, but many individual edits. And then there's a download XML that will give you the complete XML snapshot of the custom workflow at any point in time. And one of the things that we have on our roadmap is to actually make it so that we take these snapshots for you every time you save, and that you have the ability to diff these from within the product itself to be able to get a really quick view on what's the difference between these two records. Why XML? It's a little bit different than all of our audit trails and history and save search notes, system notes and whatnot. Workflows are incredibly complex objects with lots of parts and lots of permissions and lots of rows that define how they behave, and trying to understand, somebody could go into a workflow and make one change and you'd be like, well, that was pretty easy to understand. Or they could go in and make 500 changes to a workflow, because a workflow is really just a visual way of writing code. And if you were trying to understand what somebody had done through a workflow by looking through a static list of just without context or relation of like, Sarah changed this value on this date to this thing, and if 500 rows like that, it would just be inconceivable to make heads or tails of it. It'd be horrible. But XML as a structured document is much easier to read and understand the differences between like, well, we made a change here, and I can see like where this fits in the overall record structure, and this is an action, and it's not like a state definition and things like that. And so it's much easier to kind of understand if you're looking at an XML snapshot of a workflow than looking at just a long list of change, like a change list. And so we're moving in the direction for using XML as our kind of authoritative way of like looking at workflow changes. So if you're on a workflow and you go to this little pencil icon and you click it, then you'll get a pop-up of the history. And then you can see that there are really specific values that are tracked as like who set what when. Okay. And then if you're on the actions drop down of the workflow, you see download XML. And then you get, if you're familiar with XML, this is what you end up getting is like this name value pair, structured name value pair. And honestly, even though we don't have this as a diff in the product today, if you download it and you have two different versions and you just use basically like any IDE, you know, development tool today, there's a ton that are, I mean, even Notepad++ will do these sorts of things. They'll do these diffs, and it'll make it really easy to see like what got changed in one version against the other. And then finally, well, I don't know about finally, but here we have login audit trails as well. I think we're getting towards the end of the section, but login audit trails are very powerful for knowing like, is somebody logging in from a weird IP address? Did somebody that you're concerned who's been working from home isn't necessarily working very much? You know, are they actually logging in at all? Like any number of security or administrative reasons for just understanding like, you know, when are people logging in? Are they succeeding? Are they failing? For various diagnostics reasons. Oops, sorry. Okay, so tracking key financial records. So we've talked about system notes. We track transactions and items and journal entries, things like this. There are a bunch of specialized audit trails, like the transaction audit trail, the transaction delete audit trail, line level transaction, revenue recognition. So in the interest of time, I'm going to ask that you, we'll send this PowerPoint around, but this is all also in the help. But you should take a look at these specialized audit trails. They're pretty straightforward. For example, the delete audit trail will just give you some very high level information about like somebody deleted an opportunity record on Thursday and it was the total amount for the opportunity was $100,000 or whatever, but it doesn't give you a lot of details. You should go and take a look at these specialized audit trails if you'd like to know more about them. One of the powerful things about having all this be safe search based is that you can schedule them to run and you can do audits. You can save a search of this type, and then every time the auditors show up, you just ask them like what search they were asking you, what did you provide them last time? You know, you can keep track of it, they can keep track of it, but once you've saved this, it's super easy to just pull this thing up again and run it, and bam, there's the information, and the auditors go away, and you're happy, and they're happy. One of the things that you can do that I recommend that you do, whether you're being audited or not, is do things like audit your JavaScript files weekly. Look at things like role assignments and permission deltas on a quarterly basis. Annually, look at not just the deltas to role assignments and permissions, but every single change that happened. And also, I strongly recommend that you at least once a year look at your financial separations of duties conflicts in concert with your finance department. And you can base all of this off of saved searches. And it makes the process a lot easier. And then you can also do things where you just want to like notify yourself when something weird happens, like, you know, did somebody change a script? Did somebody assign the administrator permission to a role? Like that would be, you know, alarming if it wasn't one that you had thought that it was going to happen, right? Or do you want to know like who are all the employees in the company that have access to the employee record? And you can schedule these things to run nightly, weekly, whatever it is that you want to do. So it's extremely powerful, and you should definitely play around this if you're not already. And then in terms of, okay, so you've got all these saved searches that you're using as controls or reports that you're using as controls, and the first thing that your auditors are going to ask you is like, well, how do I know that somebody hasn't modified this report or this saved search that you're using as a control? Well, we have extremely detailed audit trails in on searches and reports, and it will tell you every single thing that any person did to it and when they did it. So once you establish that something is a key control, you should basically just not be modifying it, unless you have like a good audit trail evidence that like somebody, like the controller asked you to modify something in a certain way, and then you did it and they checked it out and signed off on it, and you, right, then you're fine. But this will convince you and your auditors that there's nothing funny going on with these reports and searches. Okay, and now we're coming into basically the home stretch, which is controls. So we do have the internal controls topic inside of NetSuite. It's organized. We talked about it briefly. It's organized briefly into out-of-box controls, which are just kind of on by default, or just require you to check a box to make them work. And then there's some that require a little bit of setup and configuration. This is an example of some of the controls that are documented in there. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but if you're the kind of person that cares about financial controls, you should definitely familiarize yourself with these. And there are some basic configuration controls around accounts receivable, financial close, things like that. But in terms of the types of controls that you can do that require just a little bit of additional effort on your part, we have a lot of different ways for you to, beyond just checking a box and saying like, you know, like don't allow edits in a closed period or things like that. We have a lot of capabilities in the suite to allow you to implement your own custom controls. So I'll give you an example. In NetSuite, in our instance of NetSuite, back when I was administering NetSuite a few years ago, we had saved searches and workflows in place that and I was an admin. If I were to go in and create an employee record, it would send out an email to the controller of the company at the time. If the person who was in charge of payroll started creating employee records, it would send out an email saying like, hey, like Myra just created an employee, whatever. So you can do some very simple, powerful things with some either saved searches or very small workflows without a lot of states and triggers on them. You can use roles and permissions. You can customize things with roles and permissions to kind of protect yourself from conflict of duties and segregation of duties impacts. You can restrict people to specific forms and records. As I said, search and reporting is very powerful. And then you can do scripted solutions, which can be also, like workflows, can be very, very lightweight or can be extremely involved. You know, the custom approval workflows for transactions over certain amounts and things like that. And all of these can be the basis for either just operational or financial controls inside your suite. And then beyond that, we have suite solutions. Suite solutions are developed by the professional services team at NetSuite, and they're based on their understanding of leading practices that they've done for other customers, and they are designed to get you to value very, very quickly, reduce your overall development costs. And I don't know if that 22 suite solutions offered today is accurate anymore. It may very likely be much higher than that. But we have a lot of different offerings that can help get you on your way in a particular area. For example, we have like a three-way match suite solution. We have an administration and controls toolkit, which actually started as a suite solution and eventually became an actual product. We have advanced approvals. This is another one of the suite solutions that's out of the professional service team. We have advanced approvals, which allows you to have a lot of additional approval capabilities over what is default in the suite. A lot of the approvals in the suite by default are very basic and are single-threaded and linear. But the advanced approvals module is that the professional services team built is designed to give you a lot more flexibility, like delegation or email approvals, things like that. Variable thresholds for whether or not you want the sales order to be approved over a certain amount, or a custom kind of like monitoring on it, like a combination of fields, and parallel approvals, things like that. So it's much more powerful than the default approvals in the system for a lot of records. And then there's also the administration and controls toolkit, which is basically there are a whole bunch of things that NetSuite had built for itself over the years, my administration team basically, and we wanted to get those into the hands of people like you in a cost-effective way. And so we partner with a professional services team to build this administration and controls toolkit. And it has things like, do I have a screenshot? No, I don't. It has things like, do you want to terminate access in all of your sandboxes when you terminate access in production? Do you want to be able to predate termination of a particular role or all access for an individual in your company or contractor? The audit trail for delete tracking in NetSuite is extremely basic, like I said, for transactions. But the administration control toolkit has a very detailed one that will preserve a lot of information about the record that was deleted and who deleted it and when, and can even be configured to prevent the deletion in its entirety and just block them from deleting it. And so there's a lot of capabilities like that in the administration controls toolkit that, frankly, every single customer should be using this. It's not expensive, and if you're using even one feature, there's like 12 different features in it, and if you're using even one of them, it's basically worth it. And then we have some partner solutions in this space as well. And you should definitely look at the SDN and the suiteapp.com. But, you know, one that I would like to highlight actually is FastPath, and not just because they're the ones that are helping partner on this webinar. FastPath is an incredibly powerful tool for NetSuite. It's very well integrated with the suite. These are the major areas that they support. I want it for NetSuite. One thing I really want to highlight for them, though, in particular, is the segregation of duties analysis. So NetSuite doesn't have a SOD matrix built into the suite. You can certainly run all the reports and searches and see like who has what roles, who has what permissions. You can export all of that to Excel. You can run that into ACL and do all sorts of like automated workflow on kind of doing analysis in ACL. But that's extremely heavy lifting. Like when we did this for Enel Corp, you know, with thousands of users and, you know, over 100 roles, it took, the first time we did it, it took almost 3 months, 2 people to do this properly. And then even once we got good at it, it took one person, I'd say 3 weeks or more to get this done right every year. But if we had at the time had been using FastPath, that entire exercise would have taken like days. And so you're on this call, you guys all know who FastPath is, but I just wanted to highlight, like, in particular, the segregation of duties tool is just absolutely phenomenal. And they've taken it a lot further than that since then. And the other thing that's nice about it is that it also will show you conflicts across not just NetSuite, but because their tool lives outside of NetSuite, it will show you things that you might not otherwise see. Like you might be using, for example, Salesforce.com for your customer management and order management. But you can't actually book an order in Salesforce, you book it inside NetSuite. You could have potentially a situation where there's not a conflict in Salesforce or a conflict in NetSuite, but there's a conflict across the two, the permissions in a particular set of users across the two. And FastPath can find that and help you find it and manage it. And so I strongly advise you to look at what kinds of solutions are out there on the SDN portal. And you should definitely take a look at FastPath as well. And then my last slide, on the horizon. So in the near term, what we're mostly doing is a lot of foundational work on the back end so that we can rapidly iterate and get new functionality out to you more quickly. In order to do some of the things that we wanted to do for auditing and reporting in the next generation of that, we basically needed to overhaul our entire system notes engine. And so we're really working hard on that and have been doing that for a couple releases and have, I think, even one more release of just foundational work. I think in 19.1, you'll probably start to see some new UI components and system notes, but that's about it. But beyond that, what we're looking is, for a time, we'll let you look at both systems, the old system notes and the new system notes. But one of the capabilities we're driving towards in this direction is to allow you to do things like delete or archive system notes. or grouping of notes by event. So example, if I go in and I edit a sales order and I make 20 changes to it and I hit save, what you're going to see on the system notes is just 20 lines that say Brian did this, Brian did this, Brian did this, Brian did, and they're like off by like a second, maybe not even a second. Maybe they have the exact same time depending on how fast it's being logged on the server. And it can be difficult looking across changes to know exactly like, you know, did I open the record 3 times and save it 3 times and do 3 different batches, or did I open it and save it just once with a bunch of fields? So we're going to group these changes by event. And then the next thing that we're really working very hard on is workflow versioning, which I mentioned before, is the ability to store and maintain versions of workflows and be able to look at them from the context of XML, like what has been happening to this record over time, or this workflow over time. And please complete the feedback survey. I don't know if there will be a feedback survey, but if there is one, please complete it. And other than that, that's everything I wanted to talk about today. I just want to know if there's anything that you would like to ask me.
So just a reminder, you guys can raise your hand or type in a question box if you want to ask Brian questions.
So this is Hital from Silicon. Thanks, Brian. It's very good stuff. So yeah, definitely we would like to hear more about the next releases and all those. So yeah, thanks for that. And you mentioned in between that you guys are going to send this presentation. That's correct?
Yeah, I'm happy to send this out. Either I'll send it or Trish will send it out, one of the two.
Perfect.
In the appendix, I have just like some more. I think I'm still broadcasting here. When I was mentioning that I didn't have time to talk about the transaction audit detail and transaction delete and stuff, I just have a bunch of screenshots in there. All this information is in the help as well. But as you can see, you know, this took an entire hour to get through, and so I wanted to make certain we had time for questions. But it's in the deck.
Okay, perfect.
Are there any other questions people have? No? Okay. Well, I hope this was helpful, and I appreciate your guys' time. And Trish, thank you for setting this up.
Oh, thanks, Brian, for taking the time to do this. And like Brian mentioned, we will get the recording out to everybody tomorrow. So just stay tuned. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.